Section 14 of The Story of the Trapper by Agnes Christina Laut. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ted Leinhart. Chapter 14, The Greatest Fur Company of the World. In the history of the world, only one corporate company has maintained empire over an area as large as Europe. Only one corporate company has lived up to its constitution for nearly 3 centuries. Only one corporate company's sway has been so beneficent that its profits have stood in exact proportion to the well-being of its subjects. Indeed, few armies can boast a rank and file of men who never once retreated in 300 years, whose lives, generation after generation, were one long bivouac of hardship, of danger, of ambushed death, of grim purpose, of silent achievement. Such was the company of adventurers of England trading into Hudson's Bay, as the Charter of 1670 designated them. Such is the Hudson's Bay Company today, still trading with savages in the white wilderness of the north, as it was when Charles II granted a royal charter for the fur trade to his cousin Prince Rupert. Governors and chief factors have changed with the changing centuries, but the character of the company's personnel has never changed. Prince Rupert, the first governor, was succeeded by the Duke of York, James II, and the royal governor by a long line of distinguished public men down to Lord Strathcona, the present governor, and C.C. Chipman, the chief commissioner or executive officer. All have been men of noted achievement, often in touch with the crown, always with that passion for executive and mastery of difficulty which exalts most when the conflict is keenest. Pioneers face the unknown when circumstances push them into it. Adventurers rush into the unknown for the zest of conquering it. It has been to the adventuring class that fur traders have belonged. Radisson and Grossier, the 2 Frenchmen who first brought back word of the great wealth in furs round the far northern sea, had been gentlemen adventurers, rascals, their enemies called them. Prince Rupert, who leagued himself with the Frenchmen to obtain a charter for his fur trade, had been an adventurer of the high seas, pirate, we would say, long before he became first governor of the Hudson's Bay Company. And the Duke of Marlborough, the company's 3rd governor, was as great an adventurer as he was a general. Latterly, the word adventurer has fallen in such evil repute it may scarcely be applied to living actors, but using it in the old-time sense of militant hero, what cavalier of gold braid and spurs could be more of an adventurer than young Donald Smith, who traded in the desolate wastes of Labrador, spending 17 years in the hardest field of the fur company, tramping on snowshoes half the width of a continent, camping where night overtook him under blanketing of snowdrifts, who rose step by step from trader on the east coast to commissioner in the west. And this Donald Smith became Lord Strathcona, the governor of the Hudson's Bay Company. Men bold in action and conservative in traditions have ruled the company. The governor resident in England is now represented by the chief commissioner, who in turn is represented at each of the many inland forts by a chief factor of the district. Nominally, the fur trader's northern realm is governed by the Parliament of Canada. Virtually, the chief factor rules as autocratically today as he did before the Canadian government took over the proprietary rights of the fur company. How did these rulers of the wilds, these princes of the fur trade, live in lonely forts and mountain fastnesses? Visit one of the northern forts as it exists today. The colder the climate, the finer the fur. The farther north the fort, the more typical it is of the fur trader's realm. For 6, 7, 8 months of the year, the fur trader's world is a white wilderness of snow, water waved by winds that sweep from the pole, snow drifted into ramparts round the fort stockades, till the highest picket sinks beneath the white flood, and the corner bastions are almost submerged, and the entrance to the central gate resembles the cutting of a railway tunnel. Snow that billows to the unbroken reaches of the circling skyline like a white sea. East, frost mist hides the low horizon in clouds of smoke, for the sun which rises from the east in other climes rises from the southeast here, and until the spring equinox, bringing summer with a flood tide of thaw, gray darkness hangs in the east like a fog. South, the sun moves across the snowy levels in a wheel of fire, for it has scarcely risen full-sphered above the skyline before it sinks again, etching drift and tip of half-buried brush in long, lonely, fading shadows. The west shimmers in warm purplish grays, for the moist Chinook winds come over the mountains, melting the snow by magic. North is the cold steel of ice by day, and at night northern lights darting through the polar dark like burnished spears. Christmas Day is welcomed at the northern fur posts by a firing of cannon from the snow-muffled bastions. Before the stars have faded, chapel services begin. Frequently on either Christmas or New Year's Day, a grand feast is given the tawny-skinned habitués of the fort, who come shuffling to the main mess room with no other announcement than the lifting of the latch, and billet themselves on the hospitality of a host that has never turned hungry Indians from its doors. For reasons well known to the woodcraftsman, a sudden lull falls on winter hunting in December, and all the trappers within a week's journey from the fort, all the half-breed guides who add to the instinct of native craft the reasoning of the white, all the Indian hunters ranging river course and mountain have come by snowshoes and dog train to spend festive days at the fort. A great jingling of bells announces the huskies, dog trains, scampering over the crusted snowdrifts. A babble of barks and curses follows, for the huskies celebrate their arrival by tangling themselves up in their harness and enjoying a free fight. Dogs unharnessed, in troop the trappers to the banquet hall, flinging packs of tightly roped peltries down promiscuously to be sorted next day. One Indian enters just as he has left the hunting field, clad from head to heel in white caribou, with the antlers left on the capote as a decoy. His squaw has togged out for the occasion in a comical medley of brass bracelets and finger rings, with a bear's claw necklace and ermine ruff which no city connoisseur could possibly mistake for rabbit. If a daughter yet remain unappropriated, she will display the gayest attire, red flannel galore, red shawl, red scarf, with perhaps an apron of white fox-skin and moccasins garnished in colored grasses. The braves outdo even a vain young squaw. Whole fox, mink, or otter skins have been braided to the end of their hair and hang down in 2 plaits to the floor. Whitest of buckskin has been ornamented with brightest of beads, and over all hangs the gaudiest of blankets. It may be a muskox skin with the feats of the warrior set forth in rude drawings on the smooth side. Children and old people, too, come to the feast, for the Indian's stomach is the magnet that draws his soul. Grotesque little figures the children are, with men's trousers shambling past their heels, rabbit-skin coats with the fur turned in, and on top of all some old stovepipe hat or discarded busby coming halfway down to the urchin's neck. The old people have more resemblance to parchment on gnarled sticks than to human beings. They shiver under dirty blankets with every sort of cast-off rag tied about their limbs, hobbling lame from frozen feet or rheumatism, mumbling toothless requests for something to eat or something to wear, for tobacco, the solace of Indian woes, or what is next best, tea. Among so many guests are many needs. One half-breed from a far wintering outpost, where perhaps a white man and this guide are living in a chinked shack awaiting a hunting party's return, arrives at the fort with frozen feet. Little Labrí's feet must be thawed out, and sometimes little Labrí dies under the process. leaving as a legacy to the chief factor the deathbed pledge that the corpse be taken to a distant tribal burying ground. And no matter how inclement the weather, the chief factor keeps his pledge, for the integrity of a promise is the only law in the fur trader's realm. Special attentions, too, must be paid those old retainers who have acted as mentors of the fort in times of trouble. A few years ago, it would not have been safe to give this treat inside the fort walls. Rations would have been served through loopholes, and the feast held outside the gates. But so faithfully have the Indians become bound to the Hudson's Bay Company, there are not 3 forts in the fur territory where Indians must be excluded. Of the feast, little need be said. Like the camel, the Indian lays up store for the morrow, judging from his capacity for weeks of morrows. His benefactor no more dines with him than a plantation master of the South would have dined with feasting slaves. Elsewhere, a bell calls the company officers to breakfast at 7:30, dinner at 1, supper at 7. Officers dine first, white hunters and trappers second, that difference between master and servant being maintained, which is part of the company's almost military discipline. In the large forts are libraries, whither resort the officers for the long winter nights. But over the feast, wild hilarity reigns. A French-Canadian fiddler strikes up a tuneless jig that sets the Indians pounding the floor in figureless dances with moccasined heels till midday glides into midnight and midnight to morning. I remember hearing of one such midday feast in Red River Settlement that prolonged itself past 4 of the second morning. Against the walls sit old folks spinning yarns of the past. There is a print of Sir George Simpson behind one raconteur's head. Ah, yes, the oldest guides all remember Sir George, though half a century has passed since his day. He was the governor who traveled with flags flying from every prow, and cannon firing when he left the forts, and men drawn up in procession like soldiers guarding an emperor when he entered the fur posts with couriers and all the flourish of royal state. Then some storyteller recalls how he has heard the old guides tell of the imperious governor once provoking personal conflict with an equally imperious steersman, who first ducked the governor into a lake they were traversing, and then ducked into the lake himself to rescue the governor. And there is a crucifix high on the wall left by Pierre Lacombe the last time the famous missionary to the red men of the far north passed this way, and every Indian calls up some kindness done, some sacrifice by Father Lacombe. On the gun rack are old muskets and Indian masks and scalp locks, bringing back the days when Russian traders instigated a massacre at this fort, and when white traders flew at each other's throats as Nor'westers struggled with Hudson's Bay for supremacy in the fur trade. Ah, oui, those white men, they were brave fighters. They did not know how to stop. Mais sacre, they were fools, those white men, after all. Instead of hiding in ambush to catch the foe, those white men measured off paces, stood up face to face, and fired blank. Oui, fired blank. Ugh, of course, one fool he was kill, and the other fool, most like, he was wound. Ugh, by gar, what Indian would have so little sense? Of hunting tales, the Indian store is exhaustless. That enormous bearskin stretched to 4 pegs on the wall brings up Montaigne, the noseless one, who still lives on Peace River and once slew the largest bear ever killed in the Rockies, returning to this very fort with one hand dragging the enormous skin and the other holding the place which his nose no longer graced. Montaigne, ah, bien monsieur. Montaigne, he brave man. Venez ici, bien. So, I told you about him, begins some French-Canadian trapper with a strong tinge of Indian blood in his swarthy skin. By gosh, he brave man. I told you about that happen. Montaigne, he go stumble to rough snow. How you call that? Hill steep, steep. Oui, by gar. Dat was steep hill. De snow, She go slide, slide, like the Grand Rapide, see? Emphasizing the snow slide with illustrative gesture. Bien, donc, mais montenay. He stick gunstock in the snow, stop him fall. So see? Tonnerre, by gosh, for sure she go off one big bang. Sacre, she make so much noise, she wake one big old bear sleep in snow. Montonnet, he tumble on his back. Mais, monsieur, de bear, diable, for Montonnet wink, his eye the bear jump on, top like one big loup-garou. Montonnet, he brave man, he not scare. He say one little prayer, one hand he cover his eyes, other hand sacre, dat grab his knife out his belt. Monsieur, for sure he feel her breath, diable. For sure he find the place her heart beat, tonnerre. Vite, he stick that knife in straight up his wrist, into the heart that bear. That best thing do. For sure the little prayer that told him best thing do. The bear she roll over, dead's one stone. C'est vrai. She no more jump top Montonnet. Bien, my friend. Montonnet, he roll over too. Little bit scare. Mais, his nose. Ah, by gosh, the bear she got dat. Dat all nose he ever have, no more. C'est vrai, monsieur. Bien. And with a finishing flourish, the storyteller takes to himself all the credit of Montonet's heroism. But in all the feasting, trade has not been forgotten, and as soon as the Indians recover from postprandial torpor, bartering begins. In one of the warehouses stands a trader. An Indian approaches with a pack of peltries weighing from 80 to 100 pounds. Throwing it down, he spreads out the contents. Of otter and mink and pecan there will be plenty, for these fish-eaters are most easily taken before midwinter frost has frozen the streams solid. In recent years there have been few beaver skins, a closed season of several years giving the little rodents a chance to multiply. By treaty, the Indian may hunt all creatures of the chase as long as the sun rises and the rivers flow, but the fur trader can enforce a closed season by refusing to barter for the pelts. Of muskrat skins, hundreds of thousands are carried to the forts every season. The little haycock houses of muskrats offer the trapper easy prey when frost freezes the sloughs, shutting off retreat below, and heavy snowfall has not yet hidden the little creature's winter home. The trading is done in several ways. Among the Eskimo, whose arithmetical powers seldom exceed a few units, the trader holds up his hand with 1, 2, 3 fingers raised, signifying that he offers for the skin before him equivalents in value to 1, 2, 3 prime beaver. If satisfied, the Indian passes over the furs, and the trader gives flannel, beads, powder, knives, tea, or tobacco to the value of the beaver skins indicated by the raised fingers. If the Indian demands more, hunter and trader wrangle and pantomime till compromise is effected. But always beaver skin is the unit of coin. Beaver are the Indian's dollars and cents, his shillings and pence, his tokens of currency. South of the Arctics, where native intelligence is of higher grade, the beaver values are represented by goose quills, small sticks, bits of shell, or most common of all, discs of lead, tea chests melted down, stamped on one side with the company arms, on the other with the figures 1, 2, 1/2, 1/4, representing so much value in beaver. First of all, then, furs in the pack must be sorted. Silver fox, worth $500, separated from cross fox, and blue and white, worth from $10 down, according to quality, and from common red fox, worth less. 20 years ago, it was no unusual thing for the Hudson's Bay Company to send to England yearly 10,000 cross fox skins, 7,000 blue, 100,000 red, half a dozen silver. Few wolfskins are in the trapper's pack, unless particularly fine specimens of brown Arctic and white Arctic, bought as a curiosity and not for value as skins. Against the wolf, the trapper wages war as against a pest that destroys other game, and not for its skin. Next to muskrat, the most plentiful fur taken by the Indian, though not highly esteemed by the trader, will be that of the rabbit or varying hare. Buffalo was once the staple of the hunter. What the buffalo was, the white rabbit is today. From it, the Indian gets clothing, teepee, covers, blankets, thongs, food. From it, the white man, who is a manufacturer of furs, gets gray fox and chinchilla and seal in imitation. Except 1 year in 7, when a rabbit plague spares the land by cutting down their prolific numbers, the varying hare is plentiful enough to sustain the Indian. Having received so many bits of lead for his furs, the Indian goes to the store counter where begins interminable dickering. Montaigne's squaw has only 50 beaver coin, and her desires are 100-fold what those will buy. Besides, the copper-skinned lady enjoys beating down prices and driving a bargain so well that she would think the clerk a cheat if he asked a fixed price from the first. She expects him to have a sliding scale of prices for his goods as she has for her furs. At the termination of each bargain, so many coins pass across the counter. Frequently, an Indian presents himself at the counter without beaver enough to buy necessaries. What then? I doubt if in all the years of Hudson's Bay Company rule, one needy Indian has ever been turned away. The trader advances what the Indian needs and chalks up so many beaver against the trapper's next hunt. Long ago, when rival traders strove for the furs, whiskey played a disgracefully prominent part in all bartering, the drunk Indian being an easier victim than the sober, and the Indian mad with thirst for liquor the most easily cajoled of all. But today, when there is no competition, whiskey plays no part whatever. Whiskey is in the fort, so is painkiller, for which the Indian has as keen an appetite, both for the exigencies of hazardous life in an unsparing climate beyond medical aid. But the first thing Hudson's Bay traders did in 1885, when rebel Indians surrounded the Saskatchewan forts, was to split the casks and spill all alcohol. The second thing was to bury ammunition, showing which influence they considered the more dangerous. Ermine is at its best when the cold is most intense, the tawny weasel coat turning from fawn to yellow, from yellow to cream and snow white, according to the latitude north and the season. Unless it is the pelt of the baby ermine, soft as swan's down, tail-tip jet as onyx, the best ermine is not likely to be in a pack brought to the fort as early as Christmas. Fox, lynx, mink, marten, otter, and bear the trapper can take with steel traps of a size varying with the game, or even with a clumsily constructed deadfall, the log suspended above the bait being heavy or light, according to the hunter's expectation of large or small intruder. But the ermine with fur as easily damaged as finest gauze must be handled differently. Going the rounds of his traps, the hunter has noted curious tiny tracks like the dots and dashes of a telegraphic code. Here are little prints slurrying into one another in a dash. There a dead stop, where the quick-eared stoat has paused with beady eyes alert for snowbird or rabbit. Here, again, a clear blank on the snow where the crafty little forager has dived below the light surface and wriggled forward like a snake to dart up with a plunge of fangs into the heart-blood of the unwary snow-bunting. From the length of the leaps, the trapper judges the age of the ermine. 14 inches from nose to tail-tip means a full-grown ermine with hair too coarse to be damaged by a snare. The man suspends the noose of a looped twine across the runway from a twig bent down so that the weight of the ermine on the string sends the twig springing back with a jerk that lifts the ermine off the ground, strangling it instantly. Perhaps on one side of the twine he has left bait, smeared grease, or a bit of meat. If the tracks are like the prints of a baby's fingers, close and small, the trapper hopes to capture a pelt fit for a thrown cloak, the skin for which the Louis of France used to pay, in modern money, from $100 to $150. The full-grown ermines will be worth only some few beaver at the fort. Perfect fur would be marred by the twine snare, so the trapper devises as cunning a death for the ermine as the ermine devises when it darts up through the snow with its spear teeth clutched in the throat of a poor rabbit. Smearing his hunting knife with grease, he lays it across the track. The little ermine comes trotting in dots and dashes and gallops and dives to the knife. It smells the grease and all the curiosity which has been teaching it to forage for food since it was born urges it to put out its tongue and taste. That greasy smell of meat it knows, but that frost-silvered bit of steel is something new. The knife is frosted like ice. Ice the ermine has licked, so he licks the knife. But alas for the resemblance between ice and steel. Ice turns to water under the warm tongue. Steel turns to fire that blisters and holds the foolish little stoat by his inquisitive tongue, a hopeless prisoner till the trapper comes. And lest marauding wolverine or lynx should come first and gobble up priceless ermine, the trapper comes soon, and that is the end for the ermine. Before settlers invaded the valley of the Saskatchewan, the furs taken at a leading fort would amount to bear of all varieties, 400, ermine, medium, 200, blue fox, 4, red fox, 91, silver fox, 3, marten, 2,000, muskrat, 200,000, mink, 8,000, otter, 500, skunk, 6, wolf, 100, beaver, 5,000, pecan, fisher, 50, cross fox, 30, white fox, 400, lynx, 400, wolverine, 200. The value of these furs in beaver currency varied with the fashions of the civilized world, with the scarcity or plenty of the furs, with the locality of the fort. Before beaver became so scarce, 100 beaver equaled 40 marten or 10 otter or 300 muskrat. 25 beaver equaled 500 rabbit. 1 beaver equaled 2 white fox, and so on down the scale. But no set table of values can be given other than the prices realized at the annual sale of Hudson's Bay furs held publicly in London. To understand the values of these furs to the Indian, beaver currency must be compared to merchandise, one beaver buying such a red handkerchief as trappers wear around their brows to notify other hunters not to shoot. 1 beaver buys a hunting knife, 2 an axe, from 8 to 20 a gun or rifle, according to its quality. And in one old trading list I found, Vanity of Vanities, 1 beaver equals looking glass. Trading over, the trappers disperse to their winter hunting grounds, which the main body of hunters never leaves from October, when they go on the fall hunt, to June, when the long, straggling brigades of canoes and keelboats and pack horses and jolting ox carts come back to the fort with a harvest of winter furs. Signs unnoted by the denizens of city serve to guide the trappers over trackless wastes of illimitable snow. A whitish haze of frost may hide the sun, or continuous snowfall blur every landmark. What heeds the trapper? The slope of the rolling hills, the lie of the frozen riverbeds, the branches of underbrush protruding through billowed drifts are hands that point the trapper's compass. For those hunters who have gone westward to the mountains, the task of threading pathless forest stillness is more difficult. At a certain altitude in the mountains, much frequented by game because undisturbed by storms, snow falls, without ceasing, heaping the pines with snow mushrooms, blotting out the sun, cloaking in heavy white flakes the notched bark blazed as a trail, transforming the rustling green forests to a silent spectral world without a mark to direct the hunter. Here the woodcraftsman's lore comes to his aid. He looks to the snow-cone tops of the pine trees. The tops of pine trees lean ever so slightly towards the rising sun. With his snowshoes, he digs away the snow at the roots of trees to get down to the moss. Moss grows from the roots of trees on the shady side, that is, the north, and simplest of all, demanding only that a wanderer use his eyes, which the white man seldom does, the limbs of the northern trees are most numerous on the south. The trapper may be waylaid by storms, or starved by sudden migration of game from the grounds to which he has come, or run to earth by the ravenous timber wolves that pursue the dog teams for leagues, but the trapper with Indian blood in his veins will not be lost. One imminent danger is of accident beyond aid. A young Indian hunter of Moose Factory set out with his wife and 2 children for the winter hunting grounds in the forests south of James Bay. To save the daily allowance of a fish for each dog, they did not take the dog teams. When chopping, the hunter injured his leg. The wound proved stubborn. Game was scarce, and they had not enough food to remain in the lodge. Wrapping her husband in robes on the long toboggan sleigh, the squaw placed the younger child beside him, and with the other began tramping through the forest, drawing the sleigh behind. The drifts were not deep enough for swift snowshoeing over underbrush, and their speed was not half so speedy as the hunger that pursues northern hunters like the Fenris wolf of Norse myth. The woman sank exhausted on the snow, and the older boy, nerved with fear, pushed on to Moose Factory for help. Guided by the boy back through the forests, the fort people found the hunter dead in the sleigh. The mother crouched forward unconscious from cold, stripped of the clothing which she had wrapped round the child taken in her arms to warm with her own body. The child was alive and well. The fur traders nursed the woman back to life, though she looked more like a withered creature of 80 than a woman barely in her 20s. She explained with a simple unconsciousness of heroism that the ground had been too hard for her to bury her husband, and she was afraid to leave the body and go on to the fort, lest the wolves should molest the dead. The arrival of the mail packet is one of the most welcome breaks in the monotony of life at the fur post. When the mail comes, all white habitants of the fort take a week's holidays to read letters and news of the outside world. Railways run from Lake Superior to the Pacific, but off the line of railways, mail is carried as of old. In summertime, overland runners, canoe, and company steamers bear the mail to the forts of Hudson Bay, of the Saskatchewan, of the Rockies, and the Mackenzie. In winter, scampering huskies with a running postman winged with snowshoes dash across the snowy wastes through silent forests to the lonely forts of the bay, or slide over the prairie drifts with the music of tinkling bells and soft crunch-crunch of sleigh runners through the snow crust to the leagueless world of the far north. 40 miles a day, a couch of spruce boughs where the rackets have dug a hole in the snow, sleighs placed on edge as a windbreak, dogs crouched on the buffalo robes snarling over the frozen fish, deep bayings from the running wolf pack, and before the stars have faded from the frosty sky, the mail carrier has risen and is coasting away fast as the huskies can gallop. Another picturesque feature of the fur trade was the long caravan of ox carts that used to screech and creak and jolt over the rutted prairie roads between Winnipeg and St. Paul. More than 1,500 Hudson's Bay Company carts, manned by 500 traders with tawny spouses and black-eyed impish children, squatted on top of the load, left Canada for St. Paul in August and returned in October. The carts were made without a rivet of iron. Bent wood formed the tires of the 2 wheels. Hardwood axles told their woes to the world in the scream of shrill bagpipes. Wooden racks took the place of cart box. In the shafts trod a staid old ox, guided from the horns or with a halter, drawing the load with collar instead of a yoke. The harness was of skin thongs. In place of the ox sometimes was a shagganippy pony, raw and unkempt, which the imps lashed without mercy or the slightest inconvenience to the horse. A red flag with the letters HBC in white decorated the leading cart. During the Sioux massacres, the fur caravans were unmolested, for the Indians recognized the flags and wished to remain on good terms with the fur traders. Ox carts still bring furs to Hudson's Bay Company posts and screech over the corduroy swamps of the Mackenzie, but the railway has replaced the caravan as a carrier of freight. Hudson's Bay Company steamers now ply on the largest of the inland rivers with long lines of fur-laden barges in tow, but the canoe brigades still bring the winter's hunt to the forts in spring. 5 to 8 craft make a brigade, each manned by 8 paddlers with an experienced steersman who is usually also guide. But the one ranking first in importance is the bowman, whose quick eye must detect signs of nearing rapids, whose steel-shod pole gives the cue to the other paddlers and steers the craft past foamy reefs. The bowman it is who leaps out first when there is tracking, pulling the craft upstream by tow line, who stands waist-high in ice water, steadying the rocking bark lest a sudden swirl spill furs to the bottom, who hands out the packs to the others when the waters are too turbulent for tracking and there must be a portage, and who leads the brigade on a run, half trot, half amble, overland to the calmer currents. Pipes are the measure of a portage, that is, the pipes smoked while the voyageurs are on the run. The bowman it is who can thread a network of waterways by day or dark, past rapids or whirlpools, with the certainty of an arrow to the mark. On all long trips by dog train or canoe, pemmican made of buffalo meat and marrow put in airtight bags was the standard food. The pemmican now used is of moose or caribou beef. The only way to get an accurate idea of the size of the kingdom ruled by these monarchs of the lonely wastes is by comparison. Take a map of North America. On the east is Labrador, a peninsula as vast as Germany and Holland and Belgium and half of France. On the coast and across the unknown interior are the magical letters HBC, meaning Hudson's Bay Company Fort, past or present. A little whitewashed square with 18-foot posts planted picket-wise for a wall, matchbox bastions loopholed for musketry, a barracks-like structure across the courtyard with a high lookout of some sort near the gate. Here some trader with wife and children and staff of Indian servants has held his own against savagery and desolating loneliness. In one of these forts, Lord Strathcona passed his youth. Once more to the map. With one prong of a compass in the center of Hudson Bay, describe a circle. The northern half embraces the baffling Arctics, but on the line of the southern circumference, like beads on a string, are Churchill high on the left, York below in black capitals as befits the importance of the great fur emporium of the bay, Severn and Albany and Moose and Rupert and Fort George round the south, and to the right, larger and more strongly built forts than in Labrador, with the ruins of stone walls at Churchill that have a depth of 15 feet. 6-pounders once mounted these bastions. The remnants of galleries for soldiery run round the inside walls. A flag floats over each fort with the letters HBC. Officers' dwellings occupy the center of the courtyard. Banked against the walls are the men's quarters, fur presses, stables, storerooms. Always there is a chapel, at one fort a hospital, at others the relics of stoutly built old powder magazines made to withstand the siege of hand grenades tossed in by French assailants from the bay, who knew that the loot of a fur post was better harvest than a treasure ship. Elsewhere, 2 small bastions situated diagonally across from each other were sufficient to protect the fur post by sending a raking fire along the walls. But here there was danger of the French fleet, and the walls were built with bastion and trench and rampart. Again to the map. Between Hudson Bay and the Rocky Mountains stretches an American Siberia, the Barren Lands. Here, too, on every important waterway, Athabasca and the Liard and the Mackenzie into the land of winter night and midnight sun, extend Hudson's Bay Company posts. We think of these northern streams as ice-jammed, sluggish currents with mean log villages on their banks. The fur posts of the subarctics are not imposing with picket fences in place of stockades, for no French foe was feared here. But the Mackenzie River is one of the longest in the world, with true tributaries each more than 1,000 miles in length. It has a width of a mile, and a succession of rapids that rival the St. Lawrence, and palisaded banks higher than the Hudson Rivers, and half a dozen lakes, into one of which you could drop 2 New England states without raising a sandbar. The map again. Between the prairie and the Pacific Ocean is a wilderness of peaks, a Switzerland stretched into half the length of a continent. Here, too, like eagle nests in rocky fastnesses, are fur posts. Such is the realm of the Hudson's Bay Company today. Before 1812, there was no international boundary in the fur trade, but after the war, Congress barred out Canadian companies. The next curtailment of hunting ground came in 1869-70, when the company surrendered proprietary rights to the Canadian government, retaining only the right to trade in the vast North land. The formation of new Canadian provinces took place south of the Saskatchewan, but north the company barters pelts undisturbed as of old. Yearly the staffs are shifted from post to post as the fortunes of the hunt vary, but the principal posts, not including winter quarters for a special hunt, have probably not exceeded 200 in number, nor fallen below 100 for the last century. Of these, the greater numbers are of course in the far north. When the Hudson's Bay Company was fighting rivals, Nor'westers from Montreal, Americans from St. Louis, it must have employed as traders, packers, couriers, canoemen, hunters, and guides at least 5,000 men, for its rival employed that number, and the old lady, as the enemy called it, always held her own. Over this wilderness army were from 250 to 300 officers, each with the power of life and death in his hands. To the honor of the company, be it said, this power was seldom abused. Occasionally, a brutal sea captain might use lash and triangle and branding along the northern coast, but officers defenseless among savage hordes must of necessity have lived on terms of justice with their men. The Canadian government now exercises judicial functions, but where less than 700 mounted police patrol a territory as large as Siberia, the company's factor is still the chief representative of the law's power. Times without number under the old regime has a Hudson's Bay officer set out alone and tracked an Indian murderer to hidden fastness, there to arrest him or shoot him dead on the spot, because if murder went unpunished, that mysterious impulse to kill, which is as rife in the savage heart as in the wolf's, would work its havoc unchecked. Just as surely as the sun rises and the rivers flow, the savage knows when the hunt fails he will receive help from the Hudson's Bay officer. But just as surely he knows if he commits any crime that same unbending, fearless white man will pursue and pursue and pursue guilt to the death. One case is on record of a trader thrashing an Indian within an inch of his life for impudence to officers 2 or 3 years before. Of course, the vendetta may cut both ways, the Indian treasuring vengeance in his heart till he can rake it. That is an added reason why the white man's justice must be unimpeachable. Pro pel cutum, says the motto of the company arms. Without flippancy, it might be said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, as well as a skin for a skin, which explains the freedom from crime among northern Indians. And who are the subjects living under this mosaic paternalism? Stunted Eskimo of the far north, creatures as amphibious as the seals whose coats they wear, with the lusterless eyes of dwarfed intelligence and the agility of seal flippers as they whisk double-bladed paddles from side to side of the darting kayaks, wandering Montaigne from the domed hills of Labrador, lonely and sad and silent as the naked desolation of the rugged land. Ojibways, soft-voiced as the forest glooms in that vast land of spruce tangle north of the Great Lakes. Crees and Sioux from the plains, cunning with the stealth of creatures that have hunted and been hunted on the shelterless prairie. Blackfeet and Crows, game birds of the foothills that have harried all other tribes for tribute, keen-eyed as the eagles on the mountains behind them, glorying in war as the finest kind of hunting. Mountain tribes, Stonies, Kootenai, Shoshones, splendid types of manhood because only the fittest can survive the hardships of the mountains. Coast Indians, Chinook and Chilkoot, low and lazy because the great rivers feed them with salmon and they have no need to work. Over these lawless Arabs of the New World wilderness, the Hudson's Bay Company has ruled for 2.5 centuries with smaller loss of life in the aggregate than the railways of the United States cause in a single year. Hunters have been lost in the wilds. White trappers have been assassinated by Indians. Forts have been wiped out of existence. 10, 20, 30 traders have been massacred at different times. But then the loss of life on railways totals up to thousands in a single year. When fighting rivals long ago, it is true that the Hudson's Bay Company recognized neither human nor divine law. Grant the charge and weigh it against the benefits of the company's rule. When Hearne visited Chippewyans 2 centuries ago, he found the Indians in a state uncontaminated by the trader, and that state will give the ordinary reader cold shivers of horror at the details of massacre and degradation. Every visitor since has reported the same tribe improved in standard of living under Hudson's Bay rule. Recently, a well-known Canadian governor making an itinerary of the territory round the bay found the Indians such devout Christians that they put his white retinue to shame. Returning to civilization, the governor was observed attending the services of his own denomination with a greater fury than was his wont. Asked the reason, he confided to a club friend that he would be blanked if he could allow heathen Indians to be better Christians than he was. Some of the shiftless Indians may be hopelessly in debt to the company for advanced provisions, but if the company had not made these advances, the Indians would have starved, and the debt is never exacted by seizure of the hunt that should go to feed a family. Of how many other creditors may that be said? Of how many companies that it has cared for the sick, sought the lost, fed the starving, housed the homeless? With all its faults, that is the record of the Hudson's Bay Company. End of section 14.